The bond I shared with Samantha, my best friend for nearly 8 years, was supposed to be unbreakable. We'd been through thick and thin, bonded by laughter and shared secrets. From the moment we met, it was as though fate had decided we were meant to be close. We were inseparable, our connection deep and rooted. Sure, like any relationship, we had our small spats. Those were inevitable, right? But nothing too serious, nothing that couldn't be brushed off. Or so I thought. But over the last 4 or 5 years, cracks began to appear. The tension between us grew, and what started as small disagreements turned into something much bigger. It felt as though we were walking on eggshells, avoiding the subjects that we knew would ignite conflict. And the latest one, the biggest one, had shaken me to my core. Samantha, on her best days, was the friend every person dreams of. Kind, supportive, and always ready to listen. She stood by me through everything. Unlike me, who could get fed up easily, Samantha never seemed to hold grudges. But there was always this one thing that made me uneasy: her behavior when she'd had a few drinks. She would become ridiculously flirty, with no concern for boundaries, no regard for the fact that she was married. It creeped me out. Our mutual friends even started to comment, wondering if her husband knew how she acted. It made her look foolish, but she never seemed to care. Then, about 4 or 5 years ago, everything changed. Samantha met Kyle. Their relationship had a rocky start, sure, but they made it work. They bought a house, got engaged, and eventually they were married. It seemed like they had it all together until it all came crashing down. My best friend cheated, not once, but twice, with two of my closest friends. Men I trusted, guys I spent time with, and it all happened under my roof while she was away from her husband. The first time, Samantha admitted it. The second time, she tried to deny it. But I had this gut feeling something wasn't right, and that's when I confronted one of the guys involved. He came clean, even showing me the texts where Samantha begged him to keep it quiet. When I confronted her, she played it off as though he had taken advantage of her. But two of my closest friends? In my house? Behind my back? It didn't sit right with me, and I couldn't just ignore it. I told her she had put me in a terrible position. How could I hang out with these guys now, knowing what she'd done? It was awkward. She barely apologized. In fact, she seemed to brush it all off, acting as if nothing had happened, as if she'd done nothing wrong. She said it wouldn't happen again. But that was it. No real accountability, no acknowledgement of the harm she'd caused. And that's when everything started to shift. I stopped inviting her to hang out with most of my guy friends. It just didn't feel right anymore. But she asked me to be her maid of honor at her wedding, and I found myself in an emotional tug of war. I felt sorry for her fiancé, but I didn't want to betray Samantha either. I didn't know what to do. The cheating was still hanging over everything, but she acted like it was in the past, as if it never happened. She even started to trust the people who knew about it, inviting them around her and Kyle like it was all fine now. I didn't want to be the one to ruin her happiness, so I went along with the idea that everything was in the past. I hoped, maybe foolishly, that this was all behind us. But when we went out, I couldn't ignore the way she still sought attention from men when she drank. It seemed harmless, just flirting and dancing, nothing serious. Or so I thought. But then came the one incident that truly made me question everything. 4 months ago, we went out for drinks and ended up back at my place. My boyfriend, Van, was upstairs working out, and I left Samantha sleeping in the guest room while I went downstairs to do laundry. The next day, Van called me after Samantha left. He was uncomfortable. Apparently, Samantha had barged into the room while he was working out in just his boxers. She started talking about his workout routine, and when he told her I was downstairs, she ignored him. Then she began asking if he thought she looked good. She even lifted her shirt to show him her abs. And it didn't stop there. She started doing workout moves on the floor, talking about how much better her body looked since she'd been working out, desperately trying to get him to validate her appearance. He was completely thrown off and suggested she go find me. When Van told me what happened, my blood boiled. Samantha was my best friend. How could she do that to me? She knew he was my boyfriend. Why would she even care what he thought about her body? It was beyond strange. I couldn't believe it. I confronted her the next day. I invited her over when Van wasn't around, and as soon as I started telling her what he had said, she immediately began apologizing. She claimed she didn't know why she acted like that when she was drunk. But when I told her I needed space and that I didn't know how I could ever trust her again, everything changed. She started denying everything, claiming Van was exaggerating, that I had misunderstood the whole situation. She even said she thought I would see the conversation as harmless. Harmless? Telling your best friend's boyfriend that your ass looks great? My boyfriend had never lied to me. He'd always been an amazing partner. And I knew, deep down, he wasn't the one who was lying. He didn't want to tell me because he knew it would hurt me, but he did the right thing. Samantha, on the other hand, had a history of this kind of behavior, and my gut told me to trust Van. But when I pressed Samantha about it, instead of owning up to her actions, she twisted it around and made it about me. She claimed I was being rude for bringing up her past mistakes, and then she said she felt uncomfortable around Van. That was the final straw. She was trying to shift the blame onto him when it was her actions that had put him in a terrible position. I couldn't believe it. My emotions were all over the place, but one thing was certain. I couldn't keep pretending this was fine. I needed her to acknowledge her problem, to understand why she acted like this when she was drunk, and to get help. I had been constantly watching over her, acting as though I were her parent, trying to stop her from making mistakes. And I was exhausted. I confronted her, telling her that I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay, that I was fed up. I couldn't keep going through this. Her lack of accountability had strained our friendship to the breaking point. Samantha, my best friend for 8 years, accused me of being a bad friend, of not believing her side of the story. It didn't take long for things to escalate. Her words cut deep. She called me unsupportive, said I didn't understand. It felt like the weight of all the years we'd spent together was collapsing in on itself. I was frustrated, hurt, and confused, but before I could even process it all, she stormed off. I never want to speak to you again, she snapped, as if our friendship, built over the course of 8 years, meant nothing anymore. It was the hardest thing I'd ever experienced. But I had to face the truth. Her behavior was now affecting my boyfriend, and that was something I couldn't just brush off. I respected her decision. I didn't reach out after that. I left the ball in her court. Then came the text. It was late, nearly 2 a.m. on a Saturday night when her husband Kyle reached out. He called my boyfriend a scumbag. He said we were exaggerating, that I was insecure, jealous of his wife's transformation, as if it was all some trivial drama. You've been a bad friend to her, he accused. I felt a rush of emotions, anger, frustration, disbelief. But I wasn't about to back down. I shot back, calm but firm. Maybe one day she'll be honest with you and tell you what you don't know. I didn't wait for his response. It wasn't my fight anymore. The next day, as I was sitting at home with my boyfriend, the doorbell rang. We weren't expecting anyone, and yet, there he was, Kyle, standing on our doorstep. There was an undeniable tension in the air as we invited him inside, unsure of what he had come for. His eyes locked onto me, and he got straight to the point. Tell me the truth about that message you sent me last night. I felt a pit in my stomach. I knew what I had to do, but it wasn't easy. I hadn't been sure I'd ever have to face Kyle like this, having to spill the painful truths about his wife. And there was no easy way to tell him what I knew. I hesitated, but then my boyfriend stepped in. He spoke about how Samantha had barged in on him while he was working out, alone, in his boxers. She didn't just walk in, she stayed, talking about his workout, and in the most unsettling moment, lifted her shirt to show him her abs. She kept pushing him for compliments, forcing him into an awkward position. My boyfriend tried to shut it down, suggesting she go downstairs and find me. Kyle's face twisted with disbelief. He had heard an entirely different story from Samantha. He didn't even know about the boxers. The embarrassment was written all over his face. Then, I couldn't hold back anymore. I took a deep breath, and I told him everything. I laid out the truth about the cheating, how Samantha had slept with other guys who were my friends. Kyle stared at me, unable to process what I was saying. When he asked me if I was sure, I showed him the screenshots I had kept. There was no denying it now. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked, a note of hurt in his voice. It was a question that stung. I apologized, explaining how hard it was to betray her trust, but the truth couldn't stay buried. The weight of the lies and the secrecy had taken a toll on me, too. I admitted how I had to watch over her every time we went out drinking to prevent her from making the same mistakes, constantly feeling like I had to parent her. The revelation hit Kyle like a punch to the gut. I could see it in his eyes, the shock, the disbelief. But then something changed. He looked at me with gratitude, but also with a heavy heart. I can't live with her after this, he said quietly, his voice breaking. I have a lot to think about. He thanked me for being honest and left, his mind undoubtedly swirling with the painful truths I had just unloaded. After that day, I never heard from Samantha or Kyle again. I don't know what happened between them, but from what I gathered, their marriage seemed to continue. Despite everything that had come to light, they remained together. It wasn't my place to intervene anymore, so I turned my focus to my own life. Fast forward to 2 months ago. Just when I thought things couldn't get more surreal, my boyfriend proposed to me. It was the happiest day of my life. Our future together finally felt clear and beautiful. I shared our engagement photos on social media, my finger glinting with the ring he had given me. I didn't expect the fallout. My phone buzzed in the middle of the night. I answered, thinking it was a friend calling to congratulate me. But it was Samantha. Her voice was laced with fury. "You can't marry him," she screamed at me. "You need to break up with him. You can't have a happy ending with him, not after everything." I was in shock. I looked at my boyfriend who had just woken up. "Listen to this," I said, putting her on speaker. Her rant continued, more venomous with each word. She insulted him, threatened to ruin our wedding. I couldn't take it anymore. I snapped. "You've gone too far," I told her, my patience exhausted, and I hung up on her. The next morning, my phone was bombarded with angry messages from her, each one filled with more threats. She said she would destroy our wedding. My stomach turned. I didn't know what to do, so I called Kyle. He told me that she had been acting off since the night before, but he had no idea what was going on until now. I sent him the screenshots of her messages. After reading them, he sounded alarmed. "This is why she's been so agitated," he said, his voice filled with realization. I was scared. Her threats couldn't be taken lightly, not with her history. I told Kyle that I feared she might show up at the wedding to cause trouble. That's when Kyle dropped another bombshell. He had been secretly preparing for a divorce for months. He'd been working with a lawyer, quietly shifting his assets, getting ready for the right moment. His plan was to make sure that when he did divorce her, she couldn't come after him for any alimony. He had proof of her infidelities. He was ready. Then Kyle dropped a final, chilling line. "If Samantha shows up at your wedding and makes a scene, I'll make sure she gets what's coming to her." He wasn't just talking about ruining her day. He was talking about serving her the divorce papers. At first, I wasn't sure how to feel about it. It felt too dramatic. But my boyfriend, overhearing the conversation, seemed to understand. The plan was set in motion. The day of our wedding had finally arrived, and despite the joy surrounding us, I couldn't shake off the knot of anxiety in my stomach. Would she show up? Would she try to ruin this, as she promised? The small church was filled with our closest friends and family, the air thick with love and anticipation. But my mind wasn't at peace. As we exchanged our vows, I kept my eyes flicking to the door, half expecting to see her storming in, her tantrum waiting to unfold. Kyle had assured us, though, if she dared to make an appearance, the plan was ready. Divorce papers were in hand, just in case. The ceremony continued, the priest's voice reverberating in the warm room until, with chilling suddenness, he asked if anyone had any objections. The silence was shattered by a voice cutting through the air, harsh and unwelcome. There she was, Samantha, standing at the end of the aisle, the very picture of defiance, her eyes cold and filled with malice. A cold shiver ran down my spine as she opened her mouth, spewing accusations. She claimed Van was the father of the child she was carrying, and she wasn't going to let me marry him. My breath caught in my throat. Was she serious? My mind screamed in disbelief, but my body froze. All around us, shocked eyes turned to us in utter confusion. My father looked at me, searching for some sort of reassurance. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the mounting tension. Samantha smirked. She knew this was her moment, and she had planned every detail to perfection. But before she could drag us deeper into her web of lies, Kyle stood up. His presence was a shock to Samantha. She hadn't expected him. As he approached her, the room seemed to shrink around us, the weight of the situation pressing down. He walked calmly, confidently, his hand gripping an envelope. The tension was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. All eyes were now on him. What was he going to do? With a voice that echoed through the room, Kyle spoke. "Samantha, you are the biggest liar and cheater I have ever known. You've left me no choice." He handed her the envelope, his gaze unflinching. My heart raced as the room held its breath. Samantha, her face a mask of confusion, opened the envelope. Her eyes scanned the divorce papers, the realization slowly dawning on her. Her plan had backfired. Kyle continued, his voice steady and filled with disgust, explaining that he had been preparing for months to divorce her. The affairs she had been hiding, her lies and manipulation, they had all caught up with her. My heart was in my throat as he revealed it all. The room, which had once been filled with the buzz of excitement, was now silent, the tension unbearable. Samantha's face twisted in disbelief, her eyes darting around the room, now filled with whispers. Kyle was unshaken as he explained the truth to everyone, revealing her grudge against Van and me. The shock was palpable. I caught Van's eye, a silent communication passing between us, relief mixed with an overwhelming sense of vindication. Kyle wasn't backing down. Samantha, now facing the consequences of her own actions, stood frozen in humiliation. The guests were no longer looking at her with sympathy, but with disdain. The silence that had followed her accusations was now filled with whispers. Van, seizing the opportunity, asked everyone to stay seated and, in a calm but firm voice, requested that Kyle escort Samantha out. She had lost all power. Kyle nodded and, without hesitation, led her out, leaving the ceremony to continue. The church was still, but a weight had been lifted. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of relief and disbelief. As much as we tried to focus on the joy of our union, all anyone could talk about was the spectacle Samantha had created. Some guests had even caught the drama on their phones, sharing the videos in group chats. The aftermath was surreal. I couldn't believe how low Samantha had stooped to try and ruin our special day, all to satisfy her own need for attention and control. She had wanted to cause chaos, but in the end, she had only exposed herself as a liar and a manipulator. The days that followed were a whirlwind of mixed emotions. Samantha's calls came pouring in, angry, frantic, filled with blame. She was furious, claiming I had ruined her life, blaming me for her divorce. The nerve. But I knew better now. This wasn't my fault. I wasn't the one who had lied, betrayed, and manipulated everyone around her. My husband and I were on our honeymoon, and as much as I felt a pang of guilt for her, I refused to let her drama steal our peace. I cut her off, blocked her on everything. It was time to move on. Samantha, despite all her accusations, had caused the end of her own marriage, and no amount of blaming me would change that. My parents, too, were devastated. They had known Samantha for years, and they couldn't believe how far she had gone. Her attempt to destroy our wedding had backfired, and now, as she faced the fallout of her actions, it was clear to everyone that she was no longer the person they thought she was. As for me, I'd learned a valuable lesson. A toxic friendship can ruin you if you let it. The only thing that mattered now was building a life filled with love, joy, and real friendships. And that's exactly what I was going to do. 2 months passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. Van and I remained in touch with Kyle, who was navigating his own painful divorce from Samantha. She fought bitterly for alimony, trying to manipulate him one last time, but Kyle was resolute. When she finally admitted the truth, confessing her multiple affairs, it was too late. She had already lost him. As for me, Samantha's attempts to reach out continued, though they became more erratic, pleading one moment, accusing the next. I stayed firm, blocking her at every turn. Van, too, had had enough. He warned her, in no uncertain terms, that if she continued with her harassment, he would get a restraining order. She backed off. Some of our mutual friends, who had once been close to her, also cut ties, now fully aware of her lies and betrayal. Samantha's facade was crumbling, and there was no hiding behind her excuses anymore. The world had finally seen her for what she was. Months passed, and with them the drama of the past slowly faded into the distance, becoming a distant memory. And now I have new news to share. News filled with nothing but joy and excitement. I'm pregnant. Van and I are expecting our first child. Our love story continues, with the promise of a beautiful future ahead. Samantha, on the other hand, is nothing but a faint shadow in the past. We've stayed close with Kyle, who, after all the pain he endured, is now free. He's officially divorced, and after all his struggles, he can finally breathe again. Samantha, unable to get alimony due to her affairs, is left to face the consequences of her actions. As for us, life is full of love and excitement, and we are filled with gratitude for the support we've received along the way. Here's to new beginnings, to family, and to the future.